Behold this dude!
You want a second opinion? Come on down! Get me out of here!
So where my money at? I don't believe this guy. Look.
I use money.
I got cash!
After the massive success of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days in 2003, Hollywood decided to use Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson again, starring as rom-com leads to strike gold again in 2008 with Fool's Gold. Today, we're going to recap the movie. I'm going to give my thoughts, so let's get started. Thank you for clicking on my video, and if you're returning, welcome back to Chats and Chill. I'm your host, SharionSade, and today we're going to be taking a look at the 2008 rom-com starring Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey titled Fool's Gold. Now, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is one of my all-time favorite movies. It's my second favorite, and in my opinion, it's the most original rom-com. There's also a certain magic that came with Kate Hudson playing opposite Matthew McConaughey. They were both simply at their best. So obviously, when I rewatched Fool's Gold, I assumed that same magic would be present. But before we get into the recap of Fool's Gold, and of course, my thoughts on it at the end, if you haven't already, please don't forget to go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and please don't forget to share so that more people can find it. The movie opens up giving us the backstory to the treasure that's at the center of the story. It's called the Queen's Dowry, and it went missing on a boat that sank due to a hurricane in 1715. At the time of the movie, none of the treasure had been recovered. And then we fast forward to 2008, where we meet our main characters. First is Finn Finnegan, played by Matthew McConaughey, and I find his name to be so funny, considering we just recapped How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, where Matthew McConaughey's name was Ben Barry, and Kate Hudson's name was Andie Anderson. Now, I do find it to be funny that Matthew McConaughey's name does have that same alliteration. However, 2 movies in a row now, it seems like they've just taken the last name and said, okay, what's the short version of this? That'll be the first name. Let's roll. But anyway, let's continue. Finn Finnegan is diving on a mission with Alphonse, where they meet the immense misfortune of their boat sinking. We later find out that the boat and this excursion are sponsored by the rapper Big Bunny, played by Kevin Hart.
So where my money at?
Oh, God, I don't know. It's all over.
This looks like a play from Howard Johnson.
When I tell you he was perfect in this role, now this is a very young Kevin Hart early in his career, but you can already see the makings of what would later become the comedic genius that is Kevin Hart, because he is hilarious in this role, and I actually wish he'd had more scenes. The scene of him rubbing the bunny, are you kidding me? Anyway, let's continue. Not only have Finn and Alphonse not found the treasure expected of them, but the money Big Bunny gave to Finn to fix the boat, you know, the one that just sank, Finn used to repay old debts, which is why the boat sank. It was never repaired. To make matters worse, they've now sunk this expensive boat. Big Bunny has had enough, and he orders for Finn to be axed, if you know what I mean. We then meet Tess, played by Kate Hudson. She's a steward on a yacht called the Precious Gem, owned by a gazillionaire named Nigel. We learn pretty quickly that the yacht crew operates like a family, and they're aware that Tess is actually getting divorced from Finn, the character we just met who's been ordered to be axed. Now, through this exchange, we learn that everyone feels like Finn is unreliable, and in some ways it seems like Tess believes that too. But at no point does she doubt that he actually loves her, which becomes a point of contention. She gets a little defensive when it comes to him, so it's clear there's a little bit of love there. Finn manages to get away from his captors, Big Bunny's henchmen, and through a series of lucky occurrences, he's rescued at sea and makes it to his court date to divorce Tess against his will. Finn pleads with Tess not to divorce him, only to find out he's 60 seconds too late. The divorce is final. As they're leaving, he tells her about the treasure he found earlier, which was a broken plate. It's really just a ploy in her mind to get her to stick around, but he really did find some treasure. Either way, she wasn't aware of that, and she's used to his same old spin, so she walks away, leaving him there. Finn retreats to licking his wounds at a hole in the wall where he finds his partner Alphonse, you know, the one that abandoned him earlier. Alphonse gives him a tip about Nigel Honeycutt, the owner of the Precious Gem yacht, who's worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This is also the yacht that Tess is working on as a steward. As Tess returns to work, she thinks over Finn's tip and realizes it's credible. So she works up the courage to ask Nigel to take her to the location. Yet, when she walks in, she already finds Finn dazzling Nigel with his spin. At Nigel's request, Finn and Tess sit down and tell him about their history of treasure hunting. In a bid to bond with his pretend bimbo daughter, more on that later, whose expressed boredom has dampened Nigel's trip, Nigel agrees to embark on treasure hunting with the Finnegans. They arrive at the site and find Mo, their previous boss, the one who sued them and won earlier, and his crew are already diving at the spot. Tess uses Nigel's daughter Gemma to distract the crew while Finn dives and disassembles Mo's site. Mo beats up Finn, and he returns to the precious gem with a sword that he found at the site underwater. Big Bunny and his crew show up, being that it's their island and all, and he captures Finn. Finn escapes by promising the full treasure to Big Bunny. I'm starting to notice that Finn makes a lot of promises that he can barely keep. While at dinner, Finn realizes where the treasure is hidden, and after a quick midnight dive with Tess, they not only find some of the treasure, but they realize there's more than previously assumed. Their search then leads them to another clue on land, and as they hone in on answers inside of a church, that old spark reignites and they slap cheeks. Behind the church, in the cemetery, they dig up a grave after finding a rock marking the spot, and inside is a journal with more clues and some more treasure. While reading through the journal, they're caught by Big Bunny, who chases Finn off of a cliff, he survives, and takes Tess hostage. They force Tess to lead them to her findings, lowering her down into a blowhole. She dives underwater and finds the buried treasure, but thinking quickly, she hides. Everyone descends on the area trying to get the treasure. Tess takes Finn right to it. Mo, Nigel, Alphonse, and Gary team up, and they arrive just as Big Bunny starts shooting at them, driving Mo into the water. Mo and Curtis fight with the help of Tess and Finn, and as Tess comes out of the water to check on Mo, she's captured by Big Bunny, who takes off with her in the plane. There's also this very uncomfortable scene where they tussle, and they actually have Big Bunny, who's played by Kevin Hart, a man, punch Tess, who's played by Kate Hudson, a woman, and it is such an unnecessary scene. I genuinely dislike it, and I wish they would cut it from the movie. It just doesn't have to be. With the help of Gemma on a jet ski, Finn gets to the plane just as it's taking off, and Tess kicks Big Bunny out of the plane, deservedly so because he punched her. Now, it kills him when he hits the water, but I have to say, this is the hardest smack I have ever seen anyone experience when he hit that water, and it is hilarious. It's very walk to remember, if you know what I mean. Finn crash lands the plane, and they all claim the treasure, donating it to a museum. Finn and Tess get remarried, they get pregnant, and they live happily ever after. Anything else, I have to start by saying how nice it was to start this movie and immediately see Malcolm Jamal Warner. I would have felt that way anyway. I loved Theo Huxtable. However, with him recently passing away and that just being all over the news feed and just having those feelings of mourning someone you have grown up watching. I mean, I love Malcolm and Eddie. I like Malcolm Jamal Warner in general. And he had a season of a show, I can't remember the name, but he had a show with Tracy Ellis Ross. And I watched that season and I loved it. And then it got canceled. So I really liked Malcolm Jamal Warner, as I do with all the Cosby Kids and Felicia Rashad. Seeing Malcolm Jamal Warner acting in this movie and having fun filming this movie felt a little bit peaceful for me. I felt like it gave me a little bit of peace considering the world is mourning him right now and he just passed away a little over a week ago. So it was really nice to see him, and he was playing opposite Brian Hooks. Now, I don't know if anybody's seen this. This might be a niche movie, but Three Strikes used to be my movie. Brian Hooks is hilarious. I always felt like he deserved a bigger space in Hollywood just because how funny he is. I really don't know his story, but I didn't see him much after Three Strikes. Maybe that was his third strike. I don't know. But seeing him and Malcolm Jamal Warner together First of all, what an odd but fun pairing. And they played off each other very, very well. They did a great job as Big Bunny's henchmen. I never would have thought to cast Malcolm Jamal Warner as a henchman, but it worked. And then, of course, Brian Hooks bringing nothing but laughs and comedy alongside Kevin Hart as well. It makes sense why this movie was so freaking funny, because it had very funny people. And then we're not even getting into Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson, who are hilarious in their own right. So this cast was excellent, but I have to start by saying how nice it was to see Malcolm Jamal Warner. Rest in peace. And as for our two leads, Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson, who are portraying Finn Finnegan and Tess Finnegan, I love them opposite one another. As you all heard when I recapped How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days and at the top of this recap, I love them together. I think they are one of Hollywood's best pairings, and I wish we had a whole series of movies with them playing opposite one another. I wish they would have become more of a work husband, work wife kind of dynamic, because I could have gone for at least 5 or 6 more movies with them playing opposite one another. And in some way, there were a few things about this movie that reminded me of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, not just the fact that they played the leads as a romantic couple, but when he's trying to bargain with Tess not to divorce him, he immediately goes, I'll go to therapy. I'll go to couples counseling. And it definitely took me back to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days in the street when he was like, I'll go to couples counseling. And then, of course, there was the part of their argument when they were leaving court and they're going back and forth and he says, bullshit. And I immediately thought, was that an accident? I don't think so. I think that was an intentional callback because bullshit was such a big part of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And it was the impetus for Andie and Ben, played by Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey, to actually fall in love in that movie. So when he says bullshit here, I do feel like it's a callback for the audience because of their last really big movie together. Either way, I know it's not the movie's intent to be a sequel, but I could not help but look at it that way. In my mind, even though this is Tess and Finn, in my mind, this was Andie and Ben after their honeymoon where they were looking for gold and they went down completely different career paths. Obviously, Ben, an advertising exec, now becomes a bum who's just searching for treasure and creating a lot of debt for himself and a lot of bad blood with a lot of people in his pursuit of this treasure. And then there's Andie, who became Tess, who is dealing with all of this and completely spirals, trying to hold on to her marriage and trying to push his dream of finding treasure. So in my mind, this is what happened to them after they got married and went on their honeymoon. And you can't tell me otherwise. Another part that I found to be very interesting about this movie is that we start the movie with their divorce. However, it's very clear in their individual screen times that they both still have feelings for each other. And there was something so interesting about Finn Finnegan repeatedly saying, I don't know why she's divorcing me. But the audience and all the other characters can see why she's divorcing him, but he can't. And even when they're getting divorced, he says, why are you divorcing me? He doesn't know why she's divorcing him. And it's so obvious in the first 3 minutes why she's divorcing him. And it's so funny that he's oblivious to it. This is absolutely art imitating life, because so many people, or should I say so many husbands, not everybody, but so many husbands say they don't know why their wife filed. But then when you listen to the wife, about 1 minute into that conversation with her, you know exactly why she filed. And she likely gave him several warnings. She likely compromised. She likely communicated. She likely made suggestions and recommendations and asked for help and asked him to meet in the middle. And she likely finally said, I'm done. That's almost always the story. When the husband says, I don't know why she filed, or this was out of nowhere, it likely wasn't out of nowhere. And Finn got it honest, because that is very common and very comical. One of the funniest parts of this movie to me is the consistent reference to Finn's bedroom prowess. They mentioned it several times and in very grand ways.
Really great. Taught him everything he knows. Almost.
And all Finn does is look at her with the one eyebrow, and she goes, well, not everything. Listen, is this an advertisement for Matthew McConaughey? If so, he probably has a whole lot of people sending in inquiries, because they consistently brought up the fact that he was great in the bedroom, and it was no secret. Even in the beginning, the lawyer mentioned it. She said, this is what happens when you marry someone for sex. And then later they talk about it again. Like they mention it several times, and then we finally see them in a church going ham on each other. And so I guess it's true. What's so funny about that is not only is it hilarious in this movie and the way it consistently comes up and it continues to break her down every time she has to think about it is so funny to me. And it's very clear why she ended up marrying him in the first place. The lawyer was right. However, it also falls in line with this very common myth, and maybe it's not a myth, that gigolos or men who are kind of bummy, like they don't have a place to stay, they might not keep a job, they're like sleeping on your couch, going from house to house to house, dating women. I think it's called a hobosexual. There's this theory that hobosexual men who are just dating women for a place to stay, or they can't hold down a job, or they're not responsible, they have the best bedroom performances because it's the only thing they have time to perfect, because it's the only thing they work at or put effort into. And there are so many stories that I've heard over the years, but especially in those TikTok story times, of people being like, yeah, the myth is true. I mean, he was great, but that's all he had. And I have heard that for years. Thankfully, I cannot vouch for that firsthand. I don't know that I've ever dated a hobosexual like Finn, but I will say this. That is so funny because I have heard that for years, that the bummier the man, the better he is in the bedroom. Good for Tess, because now she's got a man great in the bedroom and he's worth millions of dollars, as is she. So it worked out well for her. Stick with him, girl. Now for the rest of you, this is the exception to the rule. Do not stick beside that bummy man. If he's not bringing anything to the table, get what you need to get out of that and then move on. When that time is up, do not try to turn a hobosexual into a house husband because it's just not going to work. It worked for Tess. That's Tess. And also, I highly doubt the hobosexual in your situation looks like Matthew McConaughey, because I'm going to be honest with you. He wouldn't have even needed to find the treasure. I would have created the treasure if he looked like Matthew McConaughey. Well, you know what? This is now the third movie where I have openly fawned over Matthew McConaughey. We're going to move on. I might need to rename these recaps My Love for Matthew McConaughey Part 1, 2, and 3. What do you want me to do? He looks like Matthew McConaughey. In that accent? Yeah, okay. Anyway, let's move on. Another part of this movie was the B plot, and that was Gemma and Nigel's relationship. So Nigel Honeycutt is the yacht owner, and he's a gazillionaire, and he has a daughter who's in her early 20s, and she is doing the whole crash and burn publicly thing, the party hard, live hard, on the front of all the tabloid situation. And that was prevalent in 2008. That was when all the pop girls lost their freaking minds, and they were falling out of clubs and acting a fool, and paparazzi were at their peak, following those young ladies around and creating these salacious stories about them. And that was really what was going on in the early 2000s. So it's not a coincidence that they used a person in this movie to kind of replicate that, because that is what was going on in the media, especially entertainment news. One of the things that I loved about this B plot is that Nigel isn't just a vessel, literally and figuratively, to get Finn and Tess to their treasure. He actually has a story on his own. We see some growth and development from him as well. And his daughter Gemma, who shows up, and she's portraying a bimbo to kind of keep the attention. She likes to get attention, and the best way for her to do that is to pretend to be stupid. Now, is she that bright? That remains to be seen, but she's not nearly as stupid as she likes to portray. She's really hamming up the bimbo kind of attitude. And what I love about Kate Hudson's character is that she actually helps her grow out of that. Now, would I have loved to see Kate Hudson's character, Tess, do that in private and maybe nurture her out of that rather than kind of embarrass her in front of everyone? Yes. But sometimes it's just like that. Like, we got to find treasure. I don't have time to coddle. You're acting dumb as hell. Let's move on. So I do understand Tess's irritation, but I would have loved for her to address Gemma outside of everyone's viewpoint, because they're the only two women on this boat. And in front of all the men, she's essentially calling her out for being stupid. And yes, her pretending to be a bimbo was probably very annoying for Tess, but to do that in front of everyone, I thought wasn't very nice. So that was the only thing that I would have loved to see out of their relationship, was for that to become more of a big sister, little sister dynamic, and for Tess to maybe nurture Gemma out of that. But one of the things that I loved about Gemma is that we do see her growth as well. She gets comfortable just being herself. She gets comfortable not hamming up the idiot attitude. And I think a big part of that not only comes from Tess calling her out, but also reaching a new communication level with her dad, Nigel. It's very clear that Nigel is used to throwing money at Gemma as a way to bond. bond. Like, he doesn't put in the time or the effort to get to know her as a person, and she doesn't seem like she makes that easy, gonna be honest. But it's very clear that he just throws money at her and gives her whatever she wants in order to bond with her. He's more so a bank account for her rather than a dad. And when they finally come to a head while they're playing gin rummy, and they kind of talk about Gemma's mom and how that relationship began, and maybe Nigel's resentment towards Gemma's mom, which is now kind of translating to her. It's interesting to see them have that breakdown in communication, because where they rebuild stronger. And then we see their bond, and then we see them continuously nurture that bond throughout the movie. That was a really great B plot, and you wouldn't necessarily expect a father-daughter B plot in a rom-com. It was out of left field, but it absolutely worked. I really liked it. And the moment she realizes that he doesn't just see me as another mouth to feed or someone to support, he actually loves me, she notices that the boat, his yacht, is named Precious Gem, as in Gemma. And she's so thrilled. But the moment where she's like, thank you so much, you unconsciously, not subconsciously, you unconsciously named it after me because of your love for me. And he was like, I did. But it wasn't unconscious. Like, I love that he didn't call her out because she was having a moment. He said, it wasn't unconscious. I actually put a lot of thought into it because I love you very much. Child, you could have mopped me up off the floor. We could have actually seen these characters become punchlines. Rich, self-indulgent asshole with a yacht, and he has a daughter he just throws money at, and he has his ex-wife is her mother, who's like 30 years his junior, and he just threw money at her. They could have easily become a joke, and the movie doesn't treat them as a joke. The movie definitely plays on some of the things that are comical about their relationship, but overall the movie treats them with respect, and we actually see their relationship and their bond blossom. And I loved seeing that. We have to get into the Kevin Hart of it all. First of all, I'm a big fan of Kevin Hart. I love everything Kevin Hart is in. I think he is hilarious. So seeing him in this, and not remembering him when I first watched this, but seeing him in this during my rewatch was a surprise. But the way they introduced this character, holding an actual little chubby fat bunny rabbit, and he's this hardened gangster. First of all, you're gonna have a really hard time selling hard gangster and Kevin Hart to me. It's a rom-com, meaning romantic comedy, not a romantic drama. So it did what it needed to do, because the moment I saw him sitting with that striped blazer rubbing that bunny, I cackled loudly. I said, not them trying to make Kevin Hart tough. He better get the hell out of here. I would have kicked his little ass into that water and went on about my business. He is so funny in this movie, and he should have had so many more scenes. And what's funny is he's the most hilarious when he's being serious. The way Kevin Hart delivers lines is just the stuff of legend, and it almost always happens when he's being serious. But he does the same thing in his stand-up. When he's telling a story, even before you get to the punchline, the way he's telling it, his cadence, his inflection is hilarious. And so that was very present in this movie. I loved seeing him as Big Bunny. I also liked seeing him, Malcolm Jamal Warner, and Brian Hooks together. I never would have put the three of them together, but it worked. Now, one thing I will say is I would have preferred that we didn't later get a new henchman. I don't know why we needed so many characters. That's actually one of my only gripes about this movie, is that there were too many characters. One of the many things that How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days got right is it gave us the right amount of characters, and it gave each person the right amount of screen time. No one overstayed their welcome on screen, which helped the pacing of the story, but it also helped the viewer to understand the story. I do feel like the plot in this movie got a little bit convoluted, unfortunately. There was so much going on. And I'll be honest, I didn't really understand the history of the treasure until I watched it a second time, because I got a little confused around the Aurelia and what happened in 1715, and then what happened in 1750, and then the church and the shipwreck. And like, I understood it up until until they went on land. And then I was like, wait, I missed something. So I had to actually rewatch it to understand the history of the treasure. I feel like the movie would have been far more received in a positive light if it was easier to understand where the treasure came from. And to be fair, again, one of the things that How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days got extremely right was it didn't oversaturate the plot. It didn't give us too much of any one thing, and it didn't waste time on things that it didn't need to waste time on. We didn't get too much backstory for characters that didn't matter to the plot. We didn't get too much screen time for side characters. Everyone came in at the right amount. And in this movie, I don't think that's the case. I feel like we got way too much henchmen when they weren't actually in pursuit of Finn. I feel like we got way too much Mo and his crew. I actually think we didn't need nearly as many characters as we had in this movie, especially for the amount of runtime we had. It was packing in like a stadium full of people into 90 minutes, and it did not feel organic. It just felt like I'm learning about all these characters, but I'm not really holding on to any information about them because there's so many characters to understand. I feel like if they'd had the yacht crew for Nigel Honeycutt's yacht, the Precious Gem, and they had Mo, and maybe Mo had one or two best friends, and then everyone else on Mo's crew didn't get screen time, or they were just in the background to show that he had a full crew. But if it was just Mo and one other person, and then you have Big Bunny and his two henchmen, and then you have Tess and Finn, and then of course you have Nigel and his daughter. I think that's the perfect amount of characters. But instead we got the Precious Gem, which had Nigel, Gemma, Tess, Finn, and then you have the two other crew members who were the chefs on that same yacht, and they all got quite a bit of screen time. And then of course we open the movie with two attorneys, with Tess and then later Finn, and of course the judge. And then we have Mo and his crew, and so many of them. It was a lot. And then of course we had Big Bunny with his two henchmen, which later became three henchmen. And then of course you have Alphonse, who's just there. I didn't really understand Alphonse's character. He was kind of comedic relief, I get that, but he was just there. I feel like we didn't need Alphonse. We didn't need Big Bunny's chief of staff, who came in later. We didn't need so much of Mo's crew. I feel like we didn't even need Mo, if I'm going to be honest. If we did get Mo, it should have been a lot more streamlined. Like, we have this understanding that Mo was Finn's old boss, who Finn and Tess kind of sued to keep this treasure that they found using his equipment. They lost that lawsuit, so there's a little bit of bad blood there. And then throughout this story, they work together to find all the treasure, and they become friends again. That could have been told without so much backstory and so many side characters. And then, of course, all of this is kind of getting lost in the history of the treasure. So it's just a lot of information, but this is a rom-com. So it's not a documentary, and it's not a biography or autobiography. It's a rom-com. So I feel like they should have streamlined the history of the treasure, streamlined the relationship between Finn, Tess, and Mo. They should have reduced the amount of characters who came in with Mo. We also had Big Bunny, we had Curtis, and then we had the other henchman, I forgot his name. But we didn't need the chief of staff to come in. We could have actually just seen either one of the henchmen just step it up. And I loved the chefs, but if we have the chefs, we don't need Alphonse. I get Alphonse in the beginning, but that should have been the last we saw of Alphonse. Once Alphonse gave Finn the tip about Nigel Honeycutt and the Precious Gem, I don't think we should have seen him again. I just felt like it was too many people. The history of the treasure was too convoluted. And then there were too many speaking roles and too many relationships to keep track of. So I think that might have been part of what killed the magic of this movie, because I do think this movie could have been just as big as How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days if it had had a little bit more organization and it had been streamlined a lot more. Also, a big part of How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is the aspirational aspect of that movie. They're living in New York. They have excellent jobs. They have great apartments. They dress really well. They're chic. They're out and about at night. They're going to basketball games and concerts. There's this aspirational aspect to Andie and Ben and their friends. In this movie, everybody's really grungy and kind of dirty, and nothing is aspirational about it. Even the yacht is toned down. I feel like there was room there for Nigel and Gemma and the Precious Gem yacht to really ham it up a little bit, to give us a little bit of that dazzle, because we didn't see enough differentiation between Tess and Finn, who are essentially bums, and Nigel and Gemma, they all kind of dressed similarly, they act similarly, and they were all on the same yacht. I would have liked to see a little bit more of differentiation. Then we would understand everyone's motivation for this treasure. Because with Tess and Finn, it's really hard to recall why they're going so hard for this treasure because they're already on a yacht. Not to mention, I feel like the longing between the characters should have been a little bit more amped up, because we do see parts of that. We do see parts of that when they interact with one another, but they have so much tension. I would have liked to see a little bit more from Finn towards Tess, because we always saw it from Tess, but I don't think we got enough of that longing from Finn towards Tess. I don't know, that might just be a me thing, but I feel like, again, every other rom-com, that longing, that tension is so present every time they're talking to each other and looking in each other's eyes. It's thick, the tension is thick, and you kind of get in there with them and you're like, oh, y'all crazy kids, just work it out. But like in this movie, I feel like you can kind of forget that they're divorced. You can kind of forget what their story actually is, because you get wrapped up into the treasure and from them getting away from all the many people who are looking for them. So I do feel like some of the magic, some of that special quality of this movie as a rom-com got lost because it was just oversaturated with a lot of other unnecessary stuff. Something that I genuinely hated, and I said it in the summary, was the fact that they had this man punch this woman on camera, and they outright showed it, and it was hard as hell. I would have loved, even though it wouldn't have been as realistic, I would have loved for him to, if we needed her knocked out, I would have loved for him to like push her off and her accidentally hit her head or something like that. But to see him just pull back and actually knock her in the face was crazy. I don't know that I've seen that in a movie, or at least not in a long time. That was a surprise. That's a surprise for like a drama. For this to be a rom-com, to show a man knock the shit out of a woman was crazy. And he hit her hard as hell. And then they made sure to show us how hard he hit her, because afterwards the makeup effects, the visual effects on her face showed a swell and a bruise and a cut. And I'm just like, they couldn't have found another way to knock Tess out to incapacitate her. One of the reasons they might have done that is because up until this point, yes, Big Bunny's an asshole, but he's not exactly the worst guy. There are worse people out there, and he's also very funny. And so you run the risk of the audience maybe rooting for him, or at least liking the villain too much. And so they had to make us hate him right before they killed him. Now, I will say this, and I said it in the summary, the way they killed Kevin Hart in this movie kills me. I cracked up. He hit that water hard as hell. He smacked his little ass into that water, and when I tell you, I cackled, and I mean, it made the loudest smack. Why did they do But anyway, they could have killed him in that same way without making us hate him first, because we don't like him to begin with. He's a funny character, but we're rooting for Tess and Finn. That's all we really needed. I guess I've just gotten kind of sensitive because I grew up watching movies with very graphic violence, and I didn't think anything of it. And the older I get, I think the more I recognize how real that stuff is. What's Love Got to Do with It? I watched Bastard Out of Carolina, Menace to Society, Poetic Justice, Boys in the Hood. And for people who call Poetic Justice a love story, we might have to recap that so I can remind people of some things. Yeah, they fall in love, but that doesn't make that a love story. She fell in love with someone who put her out of his car on the side of the road and cussed her out from dawn until dusk just because she wasn't interested in him. That movie is toxic as hell. It's still a good movie, but it's actually harder for me as an adult to watch that movie because every time he calls her out of her name or cusses at her, while she is giving it right back to him, and I love it, and I like seeing Janet get a little fierce, it grinds my gears. And it sucks that it grinds my gears because this movie has three people who I love: Regina King, Janet Jackson, Tupac Shakur. And I love the three of them individually as entertainers. It also has Maya Angelou, obviously, Queen. And it's got a lot of really great characters. But the way he speaks to her, I'm like, how did she ever get around to falling in love with this asshole? Because yes, she was pranking him and being an asshole to him, But if she's not interested, then just don't talk to her. But to start cussing her out, oh my God, that movie drives me up a wall, because when I grew up, I thought that was such a sweet movie. Had no business watching it, might I add. But I thought it was such a sweet love story. And now as an adult, I'm like, girl, if you don't call a taxi and get your ass on, you have no business falling in love with somebody who called you out of your name. Period. There's a big domestic violence scene in Poetic Justice as well. And it's terrible. Even one of the guys is watching another guy beat up his girlfriend. He's like, that's not my business. And the only reason he did intervene is because the girl intervened first. And it's just like, I grew up watching movies like that and it didn't affect me at all. Or did it? Maybe I just didn't know it well. I didn't know enough to be affected by it. But now as an adult, I can't watch it without cringing. I cannot watch without cringing. So seeing a man hit a woman in this movie caught me completely by surprise. Also, the movies I'm referencing are from the early 90s. This movie was in 2008. This is fairly recent. It's less than 20 years old. I was just surprised to see a man hit a woman in this movie. Now, onto something a little bit lighter. I don't know why this moment caught me the way it did, but it had me cracking up when Big Bunny, played by Kevin Hart, picks up that emerald, and it's this ginormous emerald. And this is a big ass sensible emerald. Okay, it can't be both, Kevin. It can't be sensible and a big ass. I decided to display The Alchemist, one of my favorite books about following and creating your own destiny. And I felt like that was so appropriate for this movie, considering all of the characters created their own destiny. You have Finn and Tess, who are going after treasure and they get it, as well as Mo and his crew. Then you have Nigel, who was intent on building a bond with Gemma, and he did. You have Gemma, who didn't intentionally create a relationship with her dad. She was essentially just there to spend some time with him because it was mandated. It almost seems like she had to. And she ended up getting a bond out of that. But with Gemma, it seems like a lot of things come to her without any effort or work. So you know what? That's some people's destiny too. And then of course you have Big Bunny and his crew. They got what was coming to them. They created their own destiny. What you put out is what you get back. So with Fool's Gold, I felt like The Alchemist was the most appropriate book to display as we recap this movie. So those are my thoughts on Fool's Gold. I think it's a great movie. I feel like you're going to do it a disservice if you try to compare it to How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. I don't think that magic can be recreated. I feel like there were a lot of elements in How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days that were simply missing in this movie. There were a lot of great things about this movie. Matthew McConaughey and Kate Hudson absolutely deliver. The movie is funny. It's a very funny movie. However, I just don't think it had that same magic because I think it got lost in all of the other excess of stories and characters and all these personalities. I think we should have had a little bit more focus on just the main characters and the people in direct proximity to them. But other than that, this was a fun and enjoyable watch. Right now, it's streaming on Prime Video if you want to check it out. Leave me your thoughts on this movie and this recap in the comments section below. I'm interested in hearing what you think. If you haven't already, please don't forget to go ahead and like this video. Subscribe to the channel and please don't forget to share so that more people can find us. Thanks for watching and I'll see y'all next week. Bye.